It was 2 a.m. and I thought I was alone. 16 hours. That was how long my shift had been. 16 hours of emergencies, of bad news delivered in quiet hallways, of holding myself together with nothing but coffee and stubbornness. The break room was empty, or it was supposed to be. I plugged in my earbuds, turned the volume up, and let the music move through me, just for a minute. Just long enough to remember that I was still a person and not just a machine in scrubs. I was mid-spin when the door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. I yanked out my earbuds. Men in suits filled the doorway. Nurses froze in the corridor behind them. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And at the center of it all stood a man I had never seen before. Cold eyes, perfect suit, a thin, dark line of dried blood on his left cuff. He looked at me the way people look at things that have surprised them. Not warmly. Someone behind me whispered a name. 2 words. I felt the nurses go rigid when they heard it. He stepped closer. "Do it again," he said. My heart was slamming. I lifted my chin. "No." The room held its breath. Then slowly one corner of his mouth moved, just barely. The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. And I understood in that exact moment that I had just made a very serious mistake. The next morning, my supervisor called me in before I'd even had breakfast. New assignment. Immediate. Non-negotiable. His private floor. My name is Dr. Amara Osei. I had worked at Harlow General for 3 years, and in those 3 years, I had learned which patients to approach carefully and which rooms to avoid. Everyone knew about the sealed-off 4th floor. Nobody volunteered to treat whoever was up there. People transferred out rather than get assigned. I didn't get a choice. When I pushed open the door to his room, he was already awake, sitting up against the headboard, watching a tablet screen. I caught a glimpse before he tilted it away. Security footage. The break room. Me spinning slowly with my eyes closed, my face went hot with anger. "I'm Dr. Osei," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I'll be reviewing your charts." He said nothing for a moment. Then, without looking up, "Why do you look alive when you dance but dead when you speak?" "I'm your doctor," I said, "not your entertainment." His expression shifted, something sharp and testing moving behind his eyes. And then he laughed. A short, real sound. Unexpected. I found out later from a pale-faced nurse in the corridor that nobody, not in 5 years of working around this man, had ever heard him laugh before. By lunch, everyone in the hospital was looking at me differently. The rumors started within 48 hours. A senior doctor, Dr. Mensah, pulled me aside near the supply room. His voice was low and very serious. "Do you understand what kind of man he is? I have watched 3 women get reassigned to his floor over the past 2 years. None of them requested it. All of them disappeared from this hospital within a month." He looked at me hard. "Request a transfer today." I tried. The request came back denied before the end of the shift. That evening, I opened my locker and stopped breathing for a second. A small box sat on top of my bag. Dark wrapping, no tag, no note. Inside was a bracelet, simple gold, understated, and so precisely the kind of thing I would have chosen for myself that it made my skin crawl. Because I had never told anyone my taste. I barely talked to people outside of work. He had been watching long enough to know anyway. I walked straight to his room and held it up. "You can't send gifts to hospital staff." He was reading something. He didn't look up immediately. Then stop being the only interesting thing on this floor. "I'm your doctor," I said again, louder this time. Now he looked up. "I know what you are," he said quietly, and the way he said it made me deeply unsure whether that was a reassurance or a warning. I made a decision. Cold, professional, invisible. Those were my 3 rules starting the following Monday. Answer questions, check vitals, leave. No conversation, no eye contact beyond what the job required, no reactions to anything he said. It worked for 2 days. On the 3rd day, 2 of his men were present when I arrived for morning rounds. He looked at me with that measuring expression and said, "Simply dance." The room went tight. One of the men shifted his weight forward. "No," I said. Silence. The second man's hand moved toward his jacket. Then his voice came, very quiet. "Leave us." They left. He stood up from the chair, and even though he was supposed to be recovering, he moved with the kind of stillness that made rooms feel smaller. He stopped close enough that I could see the faint scar along his jaw. "You think refusing me makes you safer?" he said. I kept my voice completely level. "No, but it makes me myself, and I'm not giving that up for anyone." Something moved in his face. Not anger. Something I didn't have a name for yet. It scared me far more than his anger would have. 3 weeks into my assignment, a rival gang attacked the hospital. It was fast and brutal, alarms, shouting, the sound of something I refused to identify coming from the east corridor. I was in the middle of rounds when his guards burst through the stairwell door, half carrying him. Gunshot wound, left side, significant blood loss, everyone scattered. I didn't. I grabbed my kit and moved toward him while people were still running away. "I need you on the bed," I said. "Now." He sat down heavily. His face was gray. I worked quickly, the way I had been trained, blocking everything else out. At some point, his hand came up and closed around my wrist. Not hard, just firm, like someone grabbing something solid in the dark. "You didn't leave," he said. His voice was rough. "I'm a doctor," I said, not slowing down. "This is my job." His grip didn't loosen, and I made the mistake of looking at his face, really looking. The coldness was gone. What was underneath it was rawer than I expected. He wasn't afraid of the wound. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of the room being empty. I filed that away and told myself it didn't matter. I was wrong. A week later, I pulled his full file, not just his current charts, everything the hospital system had on him, going back years. Medical history, psychological assessments from a brief court-mandated evaluation 6 years ago, notes that someone had clearly tried to bury deep in the records. I read it twice. Then I went to his room and closed the door behind me. "You weren't born like this," I said. He had been looking out the window. He turned slowly and the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "Be very careful," he said. "Severe childhood trauma, untreated, compounded by loss at 17. I kept my voice clinical, the way I would deliver any difficult diagnosis. "You built everything you are on top of something that was never dealt with." He stood up. "I told you not to dig. You're my patient. That's not why you're doing this." I paused. He was right, and we both knew it. "You said I remind you of someone you failed to save? Who was she?" The silence lasted so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "My sister," he said finally, barely above a whisper. And just like that, the monster had a history. That was the most dangerous thing that had happened to me yet. After that conversation, something changed in the way he treated the space between us. He stopped making demands, stopped sending gifts. Instead, he simply appeared, in the corridor outside my rounds, in the hospital cafeteria at the same time I was there, near the roof access door I used on long shifts when I needed air, never touching, never threatening, just present, like a shadow that had decided to follow me without asking permission. One night, I had enough. "You don't own me," I said, turning to face him in the empty corridor. "I'm not yours to watch or follow or keep close. I am a person, not a thing you decided to collect." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very softly, "I know that." A pause. "That's exactly why it bothers me." I had prepared for anger, for coldness, for a threat wrapped in a calm voice. I had not prepared for honesty. That answer went straight through every wall I had built since this started. Because he wasn't performing. He wasn't manipulating. He was a man standing in a corridor at midnight, genuinely confused by his own feelings, saying the truest thing he knew how to say. It terrified me, because I felt it too. His name, I had finally learned, was Damien Cole. I learned it the hard way. A colleague named James, someone I had trusted enough to eat lunch with for 2 years, asked me to cover a patient consultation at a clinic 2 blocks from the hospital. Evening shift, he said. Simple case. He seemed nervous, but James was always a little nervous. The clinic was empty when I arrived. 3 men were waiting inside. They weren't patients. When they grabbed me, one of them was almost cheerful about it. "The boss's doctor," he said, looking me over. "You have no idea how useful you are." I went cold all over. Not because of what he said, but because of the word he used. Useful, not weakness. Useful, which meant this wasn't emotional for them, it was strategic. I was leverage, a tool to pull Damien Cole off balance, to force his hand, to make him react instead of think. They believed I mattered enough to him to do that. Sitting in that locked room in the dark, I realized, so did I don't know exactly how long I was there. 4 hours, maybe 5. What I know is how it ended. Not with negotiation, not with a careful, calculated exchange. The door came off its hinges. The men in the room made sounds, and then they stopped making sounds. And then Damien was there, and the room was very, very quiet. He didn't say anything when he saw me. He crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched down in front of me, and he looked at my face the way a person looks when they are checking something they almost lost forever and still can't believe it's still there. His hands were shaking slightly. I had never seen that before. "I'm okay," I said. He didn't respond. He just kept looking at me, and I understood something in that moment that I had been refusing to understand for weeks. Whatever this was, this strange, dangerous, consuming thing that had grown between us inside a hospital, it had already gone further than either of us had planned. For the first time since this started, I was afraid. Not of him, of what I meant to him, and what that would cost us both. After that night, the protection doubled. 2 guards outside my apartment, a car following mine to work. My schedule quietly adjusted so I was never alone in a corridor after dark. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He simply rearranged the world around me and waited for me to accept it. I didn't accept it. I walked into his room on a Tuesday morning, closed the door, and stood in front of him with my arms crossed. "This is a cage," I said. "You dressed it up as protection, but it's a cage. You're deciding where I go and when and with whom, and you never once asked me what I wanted." He looked at me steadily. "I don't lose things I care about." "I'm not a thing. I know that." "Then act like it." My voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I hated that. "Damien, I cannot be the person you've decided I am to you if you keep treating me like something that needs to be locked away safe. That's not care, that's ownership." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then stop making me want to protect you," he said. It sounded like an accusation, but underneath it, it sounded like a confession. I resigned on a Thursday. Typed the letter myself, printed it, signed it, slid it under Dr. Mensa's door at 7 in the morning. Packed the things from my locker into my bag. The bracelet was not among them. I had left it in his room weeks ago. Called a cab instead of walking so there would be no slow, second-guessing walk through familiar corridors. I was in the cab, bag on my lap, when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Then I looked up. He was standing on the pavement outside the hospital entrance. No guards, no suit jacket, just him in the gray morning light looking at the cab with an expression that had nothing controlled about it. He walked to the window. I didn't lower it for a long moment. When I did, he said one word: "Stay." Just that. No reasons, no arrangements, no promises of things changing. Just a single word from a man who had spent his entire life giving orders, and this was the first time in that life he had asked instead. I looked at him for a long time. Then I told the driver to wait. I got out of the cab, and I said, "If I stay, everything changes. Not for me. For you? Are you ready for that?" He didn't answer. So I got back in the cab. I heard about what happened next from Dr. Mensa, who heard it from people who worked near the 4th floor. Damien Cole left the hospital the following day against medical advice. Within a week, the decisions coming out of his organization became reckless in ways that made his own lieutenants nervous. 2 operations went wrong. A negotiation collapsed. People who had spent years operating smoothly under his leadership started making contingency plans because the man at the top was no longer thinking clearly. Someone who worked near him was quoted saying he wasn't sleeping, that he sat in his office for hours without speaking, without working, just sitting. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I got a position at a smaller clinic on the other side of the city. I started sleeping regular hours for the first time in years. I danced in my apartment every morning and told myself I was free and fine and moving forward. But something kept pulling at the edge of my thoughts. Something uncomfortable. I had spent weeks telling him that he was capable of change, that the trauma underneath the control didn't define him, that people could choose differently if they wanted to badly enough. I had said that to him, and then I had walked away before finding out if it was true. I went back on a Sunday evening. Not for him. I told myself clearly, this was about the damage spreading outward, about patients on that floor and staff who were caught in the fallout of a man unraveling. I was a doctor. This was a professional concern. I believed about half of that. His office was on the top floor of a building I had never been to before. I got the address from a nurse who owed me a favor. No guards at the door. The outer office was empty. I knocked once and walked in. He was sitting at a desk the size of a dining table in a room full of expensive things that all looked untouched. He wasn't working. He was just sitting in the lamplight, both hands flat on the desk surface, staring at nothing. He looked up when I came in. He looked terrible, tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. "You're destroying everything," I said. His voice was rough from what sounded like disuse. "I know. Your people are scared. Your decisions are compromised. Whatever you're doing, you need to stop." A long silence. "I already lost the only thing that mattered," he said. Everything else stopped making sense. I sat down in the chair across from him, and for the first time, I let myself just look at him, not as a patient, not as a threat, as a person who was genuinely, completely lost. "Then let's talk," I said quietly, "like two people, not a boss and a doctor, just two people." He nodded, and we talked until the lamp was the only light left in the building. I gave him one condition. We were standing at the window when I said it, the city spread out below us in the dark, and I turned to face him directly because this needed to be said clearly and seen clearly and understood completely. "If you want me in your life, not as a patient, not as someone you protect, but actually in your life, it has to be as an equal. That means no surveillance, no arrangements made without my knowledge, no guards I didn't agree to. No gifts chosen because you've been watching me long enough to know what I'd pick." I held his gaze. "You treat me like a partner or you don't treat me as anything. There is no middle ground." He was quiet for a long time. "And if I can't?" he said finally. Not a challenge, a real question. "Then we are nothing," I said, "and I wish you well, and I mean that honestly." The room was completely still. He had never in his life, I suspected, been given a condition he couldn't negotiate around. Power had always been the answer to every problem. Money, control, force. Something always moved when he pushed. I wasn't moving. And somewhere in the silence of that room, I think he finally understood the difference between wanting someone and deserving them. Months passed. The guards outside my apartment were gone within a week of that conversation. The car that used to follow mine to work disappeared. My schedule returned to normal. Just my decisions, my hours, my life. No gifts appeared in my locker. No one reported seeing him in corridors he had no reason to be in. I danced in the break room again for the first time on a Wednesday night after a long shift. Earbuds in, lights low, just me and the music and the quiet relief of being exactly myself with no audience. I turned around when the song ended. He was in the doorway, not filling it the way he had the first time. Not with guards behind him and cold eyes and the whole weight of who he was pressed forward like a warning. Just him. Hands in his pockets, jacket a little less perfect than usual. He looked at me across the break room. He didn't step forward, didn't say do it again, didn't make a single move to close the distance between us. He just smiled, quietly, like someone watching something they are grateful exists in the world without needing to own it. Then he turned and walked away down the corridor. I stood there alone in the break room, music still playing softly through my earbuds, and I felt something settle in my chest, warm and solid and mine. He came back the next evening. Not to the hospital, to my door. No guards, no arrangement, just him, and flowers he had clearly picked out himself badly, and an expression that had nothing rehearsed in it. "I'm not here as your patient," he said. "I'm not here as anything with a title." He looked at me steadily. "I'm here because I chose to be, because I want to ask you, not tell you, not arrange, not decide, if you'll let me try." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stepped aside and held the door open. He walked in, and this time it felt nothing like a trap. It felt like a beginning.